Welcome to Money Math Made Easy, where we mainly discuss and resolve any issue related to finance and math. And today we want to mentally figure out some percentage. Why? Because sometimes, let's say they give you a 15% discount, 5% discount. You just want to figure out how much is it quickly. So this skill is important to know figure out some percentage quickly without any calculator. Let's go to the easiest one, 50%. You know 50 is half of 100. 50% is 50 over 100. So 50% of any value is simple, just half of it. So 50% on object, you just take half of it. Let's say you have 50% of 8, just half of 8. So that just gonna give you 4. That's just gonna give you 4. 50% of 20, half of 20, that give you 15. Any value. I guess this is easy. Let's go to another one. What about 25%? 25. You know 50 is half of 100, but what about 25? 25, we got 425 in 100, because 4 times 25 give you 100. So it's gonna be a quarter of it. So if they ask you 25% of a value, you can divide it by 4. Or the easiest one, what you do, you just compute the 50%, half of it give you the 50%, and half of it one more time give you 25%. So that's the easiest way to do it. Let's say 25% of 18. What I do, I just divide 18 by 2. This gives me 9, right? This gives me 9. Okay? This is 50%. I need 25%. So I'm going to take the 9 and divide the 9 by 2 one more time. And that's going to give me 4.5. That is the 25%. So that's the easiest way to do it. 25%. You divide by 2 and you divide by 2 one more time. Okay? That easy. No, you know how to compute 50% easily, 25% easily. It's possible to combine it to get 75%. So you just, let's say they give you 75%. You know 75 is 50 plus 25. You just compute 55% first, 50% first, half of it, and after that you compute 25. You just add them together, you get 75%. If you want 75%, okay? So let's say if I need 75% of 18, I would say 50% is 9, okay? That's the 50%. I know 25% is 4.5. Those 75% gonna be 9 plus 4.5. 9 4.5 plus 4.5. So that's gonna give me 13.5. 13.5 is 75%. Why? Because we know the half is 50. We know half on my tab is 25. So I have 50% plus 24%. That give me exactly 75%. Okay? That's an easy way to compute 75%. Okay? Okay, let's move to another one. What about 10%? What we know? We know in 100 we got 10 times. So when they ask you 10%, you just 1/10 of the value, whatever the value. So 10% of any value, you just to divide it in 10 per, just take 1. 10 per equal 10 equal per. Whatever it is, object, you just divide it in 10 per equal, you got 10%. 10% here is just 10%. So if I have 70, they ask me 10%, I just have to divide it in 10 per. 70 divided by 10, so this gonna give me 7. So 7 is the 10%. I just divided in 10 per equal. So 7 is just 10% of 70. If I need 10% of 80, I just have to divide it in by 10. By dividing by 10, let's say what I'm gonna have here, I just have 8 divided by 10. This gonna give me 0.8. because whatever the value, when you divide it by 10, you just have to move the decimal value to the left. So if I have 12.5, I divided by 10, so I'm gonna move this just one decimal point to the left, so that's gonna give me just 1.25. That's the easiest way to compute 10%. So let's say I have 10% and they ask me to 20%. What do you think about 20%? What do you think about 20%? Give me an idea. The easiest way for 20%. It's easy, guy. Try. So if I know 10%, so they ask me for 20%, I just have to get the 2 times of it. So let's say 20% of 70. I know 10% is 7. So if they ask me for 20%, I just have to compute like 2 times 7. 2 times 7, that gives me 14. 14 is just 20%. 14 is just 20%. Let's say if they ask me 30%, 30% gonna be 3 times of it. Okay, once I got 10%, they got me 20%, 2 times, 30%, 3 times. So it's gonna be easy. You can combine them. Okay, you just combine. What about 5%? What about 5%? What do you think? What about 5%? What about 5%? What do you know? I know 5 is half of 10. Easy. So let's say they ask me for 5% of 70. What I have to do first, I have to compute the 10%. The 10% gives me 7. So I took half of 7. That gives me 3.5. So 3.5 is just 7. It's just 5%. You see, with 10%, I can easily compute 20%, 30%. Okay, I can easily compute 5% also. So I divided by 10, that gives me 10%, and by dividing by 2, that gives me 5%. So that's a good technique. So let's say if you understand 10%, we say 10%. Any value divided in 10 per equal, you're gonna have the 10%. So then for 20%, 30%, it's just 2 times, 3 times, 4 times the value. So while 5% is just half the value. So it's easiest to compute 20% and to compute also 5%. So there is a lot of combinations you can do by doing that. Okay, one more thing to do. What about 1%? I know 1% is just 1 of 100. So when they ask me 1% of any value, I just have divide this value by 100. Let's say I have 230, and they ask me for 1% of it. Let's say I have to compute 1% of this. 1% of this gonna be easy, guy. I just have to divide this in 100 per equal. So I just have to divide 230. I just have to divide it by 100. So what I'm gonna have, I know by dividing in 100, I have to move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So if I have to move to starting here, 1 place, 2 place, 2 place to the left, gonna give me 2.30. That's for 1%. You see, I just have to move. So remind me, 1%, you just have to divide it 100 per equal. That give you 1%. Once you know 1% is the same for 10%, you can get 2%, 2 times, 3%, 3 times. Okay, once you know 1%, you can have 2%. If they need 2% of it, 2%. If they need 2% of this value, what I have to do, I just have to have 2 times of 2.3. 2.30 is gonna give me 4.60. 4.60 is just like 2% of this. 2% of this. So the strategy is that's gonna help you when you have to combine. Let's say now, if you understand 50%, 25%, 10%, 5%, so you're gonna combine them to resolve other problem. Let's say they ask you, let's say 15%. let's say they ask you 15% of, I have to compute 15% of 80. What I'm gonna do, 15%, what I know 15 is like 10, right? 10 plus 5. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna compute 10% first, and after that 5%. I know 10% of 80, what is gonna be? Is gonna be 80 divided by 10. 80 divided by 10. Quickly, so I have to move the decimal point just one place, so that's gonna give me 8, because I have to move this from here, just gonna be just 8. That's the 10%. That's the 10%. So remember, I need 15%, so that's the 10%. I need the 5%. The 5% on side of the 10%, I know the 5% gonna be half of this one. So what I'm gonna have, half of this gonna give me 4. So since I have 4, so I have the 10%, I have the 5%, combining them, 10% plus 5%, they're gonna give me the 15%. So what I'm gonna have, I know the 10%, I know it's 8, right? I know the 10% is 8, and I know the 5% is 4. So the total gonna be 12. The 15% easily is just 12. So with that in mind, guys, you can easily compute 15%, but also you can compute whatever you can combine. Okay, let's say you want to know, let's say 12% of a value, 12%, and let's say 12, you want to compute 12% of whatever the value. Let's take example, I don't know, let's say example 40. You want 12% of 40. Same thing, you just 12 is, 12 is 10 plus 2, right? So what you're gonna do, you're gonna just compute the 10%. The 10%, you know how to do it. Remember, we divided in 10 power equal. No, it's gonna be 40 divided by 10. 40 divided by 10, that give me 4, right? That give me 4. That's the 10%. Now what I need 2%. What I know, 2%. Remember, I have to compute the 1% first. 1% gonna give me 40 divided by 100, right? I had 40. I'm gonna divide it by 100. That's gonna give me 1. They're gonna give me 1%. So 1% is gonna be 0.4. This is the 1%, and 2 times 1% gonna give me 0.8. So 12%, that's the 2%, and that's the 10%. By adding them, they're gonna give me 4.8. That's 12%. So with this in mind, you can easily compute 12%, 13%, 15%. Remember, 10%, you just divide it by 10. You just have to move one decimal to the left. Okay. Remember, 1%, just divide it by 100, 2 decimal to the left. With that in mind, you can easily compute a percentage. So if you're gonna buy something, they give you some discount. You can figure out the percentage quickly. I hope this was helpful, and that will help you with your daily activity. See you for another video.